Welcome to Dual Podcast Empires on Air Workspace, a session series. And I am Majesty AliNICOLE WOW, and I am joined by the wonderful Queen Brenda Lynn, who is one of my Star Celebrity-preneurs. And I'm excited to have her here with me during this series because we are going to be focusing on the benefits of having a solo and guest featured podcast for business. And Brenda Lynn is embarking on this experience for herself. So going to be doing some workspace sessions with her during this series. Brenda Lynn, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for the invitation. I always love doing these sessions with you.
Oh, wonderful. I'm glad that we are going to be focusing on your Dual Podcast Empires building initiative. And so this is so exciting. We've done so many podcast series together, and you've been featured on a variety of different podcasts. And again, we've done series together and tons of other things. And now you're going to be embarking on actually starting your podcasting journey in terms of it being your podcast that you are going to be launching. And so before we jump into that, because we're going to be doing this in a series, so I figured that during this first part, you could share a little bit about what you gained from the training, which I'm going to do a preface, to that for the listening audience. And then we'll see what came up for you. And then in our next part of the series, then we'll maybe start doing more of some master planning. So how does that sound to you?
Sounds great.
Okay, great. So just to set the tone and lay a foundation for this particular initiative, Dual Podcast Empires Building is all about having, yes, your own podcast for business, being that you are a solo brand or so, and focusing on what your unique concept is that you bring to the world that you want to highlight, but also the benefits of being able to do collaborations, whether it is doing a co-podcasting with someone, but also focusing on having guest features on your podcast. So I have a training that I will link in the description so that you can go and listen to that particular training. And it's one that Brenda Lynn has listened to, and she's going to be sharing about what her experience was with listening, some of the things that she gained, and also what she thinks are maybe some highlights or so, or things that you need to pay attention to. So Brenda Lynn, let's jump in and talk about that, and then we'll start seeing if we can do some jumpstart initiatives in this particular workspace session. So tell me about, or us, I should say, just about what you gained from the Dual Podcast Empire's profits, or anything that you want to share about that to set it up.
I really like the training. It really opened up a whole different perspective on podcasting. I have been on summits. I've hosted summits. I've got a real vast network of people that really complement the type of work that I'm doing.
Right.
And I thought off and on, I've thought about doing a podcast, but it just seemed so heavy. It seemed like I couldn't work it into my schedule. And then I was torn between, do I do the solitary thing, like just me in it? Do I interview other people? And to me, it was an either or proposition. And I couldn't decide between those. So then I said, oh, I'll do that later. So when I got involved in this training, it really opened up the opportunity to do both of those things, whether they're together or whether they're separate. But I really like the idea of sharing some of my wisdom on there and complementing that with experts that I've got a vast community of that can bring different ideas to the table, different perspectives. I've listened to people that had podcasts where it's just them talking, and you really only get one sliver of the pie. get one small view of reality, and it's their view of reality. And often when I hear them, I think, God, I'd really like I know people that teach on that subject or on this subject, and I'd really like them to really embellish their wisdom with different perspectives as they went along. So this just opened up that opportunity to do both of those things within one program. Even if it was even if they were separate podcasts, I like the idea of it being one podcast. And having me talking some of the time, having a guest on maybe once every 2 weeks, or every once, not even every once in a while, fairly regularly. The other thing that I've found with a lot of people that I've been on their podcasts, or other people have been on their podcasts and I've listened to them, was that the host, who's doing all of that work and obviously has big communities, has something to contribute, kind of gets lost. They become the techie behind the scenes, not really honored for the wisdom that they're bringing to the table. So with some of them, I've turned the table on them, and I've said, let me come on your podcast and I'll interview you. And so you can shine in the spotlight for a change. And we've done that off and on, not often enough, I don't think, but that was one perspective. But doing the dual podcast really opens up the venue for everybody to shine and everybody to share their wisdom. And I think that you get a much more robust experience.
Absolutely.
The audience gets a much more robust experience from that type of a format.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's something, as you know, in the training is highlighted in terms of the benefits of being able to have a dual podcast. Is because what I have found over the years is that when hosts are just in that position or so, even though they are sharing their wisdom, often they do, how can I say it? Often they are overlooked in terms of the authority. The audience looks at them as hosts and is very focused on the guest at hand, right? That's
their authority is being a host.
Yes, right. And there's so much more, is so much more than that. And when we're talking about podcasting for business, because this makes the difference when you are doing what I call podcastpreneurship and productionpreneurship. When you are in business, you do have to have a business focus. So it is important as a brand that you also be able to stand out. And that's why one of my recommendations is, and you'll hear this in the training, those of you who will listen to it, is that if you're going to embark on doing a podcast that has the dual focus, just like what Brenda Lynn said, she would prefer to have it on one platform. You need to first set that platform up with it being episodes of you, whether it's for the first season or the first 3 to 5, and then start incorporating guests. You want to lay that foundation for your brand first, and then start incorporating others, into that. That's just a format. But the reason why this is important, just like what Brenda Lynn brought up, is a lot of times that the host, even though they are an expert and they are an authority, so to speak, people tend to get very one-dimensionally focused and then just see them just in that host spot, even though they know that they are experts, they know that they are authorities, but somehow there's like a disconnect. And one of the things in terms of benefits with profitability, Brenda Lynn too, is because there is a lot of work that goes into setting up podcasts in terms of being more consistent with it, is that it is a job within itself, in a sense, even though I make the process very easy where it's not like that, but that's years of experience of learning how to do it differently. You need to be compensated for what you bring to the table. So there are a lot of different formats that others will hear about within the training, where there's pay to play podcasts. There's different opportunities that I mentioned in terms of even creating products with guests. There's a lot of different things because you want to build profitability. So, Brenda Lynn, before we start really getting into the nuts and bolts in terms of maybe doing some master planning, with what is going to be transpiring with your new emerging podcast initiative, let's talk a little bit about just some of the ways that you might be thinking, and then we'll take the next segment to actually start getting into the nuts and bolts. But in this workspace session, let's talk a little bit about you wanting to do maybe the podcast, yes, that is where it's you, and then you are bringing on some others, but you also have publications and you have products. And so that's something, when we start doing the master planning, we do want to focus on being able to develop segments that are around some of the products that you have and service opportunities. So anything else you want to say about the training, though, before we start moving forward into that?
No, the only thing I will say is it left me very eager to move forward, which in the past, when I've entertained podcasts, I've always, as I said, kind of went, okay, I'll deal with that later. I'll put that later, because I didn't really have a foundation or a format to work within. So the training, as I went through it, was so clear on the path forward and how to move forward.
Great.
With ease and grace, I'll say. Not slugging through quicksand as it seemed before, it was really like, oh, this sounds really easy, and I can move forward with that and just get the ball rolling. So it's very different from when I've entertained podcasts before.
Awesome. Okay, great. That's wonderful. I'm so glad you brought that up, because someone definitely needed to hear that, there are easy ways to actually move into this. But again, when you are setting a podcast up that's going to be more focused in terms of your business, you do have to look at it from a very different vantage point versus just, oh, I'm going to start a podcast and I'm just going to start sharing knowledge with the world and bringing other people on or so. Because a lot of times people think about that, but there's more to it than that, right?
Yeah, because you're right. It takes time and effort, and you are sharing the wisdom that you've collected over, in my case, decades and decades.
Yes, right.
Of life, of work, of personal development, and all of that has value and has to be honored. Or else I don't think that just from an energetic perspective, from that from the give and receive side,
right,
I don't think that if you're not honoring yourself during this process, I don't think that it will be successful.
You are absolutely correct. Yeah. Yeah, you are. The divine right value exchange really does have to be there.
It absolutely does. And some people don't put themselves into the mix. They don't consciously put themselves into the mix. They think, well, this will benefit me.
And benefit others, but yeah.
But I think that many people start podcasts thinking, oh, this will be a great benefit to me. And then down the road, they find that they're doing a lot of the work and not reaping the rewards from it. There's no balance there between the give and receive part of it. And anything, especially in this new world that we're moving into, anything that is out of balance like that, even though people think that they're doing something great for the world, if it's out of balance, it will not fit into the new vibration.
It absolutely will not. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because this is why it's important to lay a foundation.
Yeah.
And to also see that you can have both in this mix, just as Brenda Lynn mentioned that her perspective around podcasting early on and just throughout her experience in terms of whether she was ever going to do one, was that she thought that she had to choose between it had to be this type or it had to be this type. And a lot of times that is because of the examples that are out there. You typically see majority of podcasts, they are either one-dimensionally focused in terms of it is the brand itself, or you have where there's interviewing and that's all. And again, when you listen to the training, there's a variety of different formats that you can use and start to set up having the profitability aspect. Now, I mentioned that Brenda Lynn has several products and publications, and service opportunities. So that's something that she can feel very confident in terms of setting up her podcast, to know that she has something consistent to be showing up to talk about or to share, because there's a variety of different levels, and we're going to discuss that in the next segment, in terms of different segments that she could use to position herself as an authority, the authority that she is, but in a more powerful and profitable way, because again, we are talking about business. And so something I want to say before we start to shift, Brenda Lynn, is on the note of honor. One of the ways that individuals who want to start a podcast, or maybe they're already doing podcasting, can honor themselves is that you can actually do shorter segments that is going to honor your time, and then lead people into a product that is more expansive on that topic, and make them pay for the next level of knowledge. So whether that is a 5 to 10 minute or 5 to 15 minute type of podcast, you can do those. I have trained people in doing tidbit podcasts where they come on, and some of their podcasts are like 2 minutes that they're sharing some wisdom and insight, and then leading people either into a longer segment of something that they've done. I'll share an example. On one of my podcast platforms, I come on and I do an introduction, and then I actually segue people into some type of training that I've done on another platform or so, like maybe it was a YouTube video or another segment or so. I will leverage and repurpose content, and that is honoring my time. It's multiplying my gifts, and so that's just a format. That's just something that you can choose to honor your time, in terms of not necessarily sharing so much knowledge consistently, but being able to build an accountability system with an audience that, yes, they are honoring and they're getting the wisdom from you. That's a good jump start. But should they want more, then that is where they actually need to either now pay to play in a podcast community. And I talk about that in the training, where they can participate on that next level. But if not, then here's, what they're gaining. But you do have to look at that system of honor. You definitely consider some of the articles that you have written, do podcast segments around that content. So those are just, considerations for individuals, is that that's how you honor your time too, is because on platforms where most people may not be familiar with you and they may not go and read a blog post, you can do segments that you are actually sharing from the blog post or is inspired by the blog post. You can, of course, link the article or the blog post in the description, but instead of counting on people to actually go and read that, you can share, from that and talk from that. So there's a variety of ways that you can really honor what you are putting out there, and repurpose even your free content in a very, very unique way, for others to benefit from, for sure.
I really like that approach too, because not every podcast segment is for every person. Like some people might have interest in this and not interest in that, and others are going to be the exact opposite. And I like the idea of the short podcast because it really sets the stage for people to know what they're getting themselves into. And the other thing is, when you're doing a podcast and you're talking for an hour, people only retain a very small portion of what you've said.
Right.
The rest of it kind of goes out the window. If you leave them with a resource where they can go back, you're not dumping a whole bunch of information on them. You're introducing key points of the training that is up and coming. And then you leave them with a resource that they can go on their own time, They can review it, they can buy it, they can, on Gumroad, they can rent it.
Right.
There's different ways that they can use that, or they can go to a free YouTube video that is more
Right.
expensive, but the podcast has served its purpose by introducing people to a level of wisdom that they may not otherwise have had access to.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then if you want to do something longer, then that is when you can save for your guest podcast that maybe, like say, if you do a 5 to 10 minute type of podcast or so, and then when you have a guest, maybe it is a 30 to 45 minute, type of, because
Right.
there's exchange going on. And because then that podcast segment will be focused on what they're doing and you're highlighting it. So that's a way too. But also too, people have to look at this, that podcasting, when you bring guests on too, that's a form of marketing for them. And them being
Yes.
able to leverage, that. And so that's why I say in some cases, depending on what you're going to set up, there are some packages that you can create that are pay to play. And I used to have different levels of this, that if someone wanted to have a 15-minute interview or 30-minute, interview or so, that it was free for that. But anything after that, we're getting into a promo package.
Yeah.
Because this is evergreen content for them to leverage consistently. And if you are doing any marketing around that, that's a whole nother training. But I bring that up because, again, we're talking about podcasting for business.
Yeah.
And in a society, in an online space, that people have gotten very spoiled in terms of free content. So it's almost just expected that people can come and do, let me share this here, let me share this here, and there still not be the divine right value exchange. And so that's why in the dual podcast profits, in building an empire around, this particular initiative, you have to really think differently. You absolutely have to think differently. You have to put in your big rocks first, and you have to have a profits model, not just a business model. You have to have a profits model around this particular initiative. So we're going to get into all of that for sure. So, Brenda Lynn, before we close out this particular workspace session, because I feel like what we'll focus on in the next part of the series is, of course, helping you to develop what's going to be yours. But I feel like we've gotten a good foundation here just from the conversation of you saying, yes, I like the idea of maybe starting out with one platform where you're sharing your knowledge with some segments and then being able to incorporate guests. And so we'll talk about a platform that I will recommend, but of course you can set up on any other platform that you choose. But I know platforms that work well for that initiative. And so that's something we can discuss when we return. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Okay, well,
Look forward to it.
Great, me too. Before we wrap up here, is there anything just in this initial segment that we've talked about that you want to reiterate, or something that you feel excited about, something that you would like to impart to the listening audience in terms of them gearing up for, what could be possible for them?
I think what I'd say is as we move into this new world, things become easier. They become lighter, they become easier. They're not that there's not that heaviness to them. And this is a perfect example of something for me that I felt was just too much work, too heavy, valuable, but wanted to put on hold until I had more time. And this training really shone a light on how simple it could be to move forward with a podcast and share that wisdom with the world, and use that as a business building tool.
Absolutely, absolutely. And before we close out, something that was brilliant, what you said, something that I want to just mention in terms of going back to the benefits. The benefits of having a dual podcast is, of course, you being able to share who you are, but also showcasing, as Brenda Lynn mentioned too, the network of individuals that you have. And it is a good tool to build a network if you don't have one, and the opportunity to do collaboration. But something Brenda Lynn said early on, that's tremendously valuable is the fact that your podcasting initiative does not become one-noted or one-sided in terms of it's just, your perspective. When you can have the integration of bringing others on, that's going to be tremendously beneficial. And even if you're doing a solo podcast where it is just you, and then you have a platform that's a guest, what this does collectively for you as a brand is that you can showcase those platforms together. So I just want to make it clear, we're not saying, you shouldn't have a solo podcast, because you listen to the training, you see where I won't say I make a case for all, but I do share different examples of how you can have a podcast platform that is just for you, and then one that is with the guests, or again, being able to do the integration. So I'm excited because Brenda Lynn wants to embark on the integrative podcasting aspect, and I think that is a great way to really break into this, to leverage both the solo and the guest featured podcast. So, all right, Brenda Lynn, thank you. I'm looking forward to our next Workspace session.
As am I.
All right. Well, we will be back to see you soon with the next part of this series, where we are in the work seat with Brenda Lynn. All right. We'll be back soon.